Today I sit down with Threat. Now most of you will know him for his days coaching NIP, which was the beginning of 2016 to the end of 2017. However, since then he's been very quiet. He decided to leave that life behind and has moved on to, well, using his degree and getting a job outside of esports, with which he seems quite content at the moment. But of course, having played professionally in 1.6 between 2005 and 2012, on top of all the years in CSGO, it's pretty difficult for him to keep his eye off the scene. So I quiz him about current affairs, about Swedish Counter-Strike, about coaching and the challenges therein, what he thinks about some of the recent roster changes and MIBR and Cloud9, and what he thinks could be really awesome for the game moving forwards, and much more. Okay. Hello, Bjorn.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can, yeah, everything's good. So this is really cool. Thanks for joining me for a podcast. Obviously, this is funny because we haven't really even caught up in a while. And I know you sort of, you left CS, and obviously CS was a really big part of your life for a very long time. I guess that's a good place to start off with. What were the major decisions going through your minds that you had to make when making that choice to leave?
Well, it kind of began in June last year, 2017, when I finished my master's. I got my degree, and I knew I still had to do at least a year out with NIP, but I felt that I really wanted to pursue my computer science career. Anyway, we during the October, November, December of last year, there were just so many tournaments, and I was so exhausted when we got back from IEM Oakland. And right after that, we still had, I think it was Blast, and after that we had Pro League. And I kind of made a decision during Blast in my mind that I would tell them at Pro League that I wanted to quit the team and pursue my other career, because I just don't enjoy that lifestyle anymore. It was too much work at that point.
Could it have been different in some way? Let's say you had a bigger coaching staff to take off some of the various burdens you had as a coach. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems as though you sort of had the burden of doing everything. Managing the players to a large extent, maybe socially and emotionally, as well as also being the analyst. And obviously, at the beginning, I think. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like one of the motivations for you was to be able to call, and obviously then the coaching rule came in very quickly.
Yeah, it's kind of weird how my role in NIP changed, because when I joined the team in 2016, as you said, I was the in-game leader, and I was allowed to talk all throughout the match. And then when the ruling, the coaching rule came, I always had to take a step back. And as everyone knows, it's kind of weird how coaching in CS works. There's no clear role, what you're supposed to do. Different teams have give their coach different responsibilities. Some of the coaches, they have more of a social role in the team, like the old coach for SK, or some have a more strategic role, as I did. And I think I kind of struggled with that, and that's partly my fault as well. That I never, after they made the rule change, I never felt like I really knew what my responsibilities were, if that makes sense.
Did you just focus on being an analyst, or were you focusing on trying to correct, the individuals and how they were playing the game and fitting them together? What were the biggest struggles?
I think I was trying to find a balance, because First, I want to make new strats. I want to change our current strats, change our default on different maps, and that takes a lot of time. And I also want to prepare for the actual tournaments, which means watching a lot of demos and doing a lot of analysis of other teams. And on top of that, you also have to do the actual practice, right? So you have to be on TeamSpeak and I have to be in game watching them play. And I think I struggled a lot with. During the games, sometimes I actually wanted to be focused on writing down stuff that happened and talk with them afterwards, but sometimes they wanted to get direct feedback during the games, and it was really hard to find a good balance with that. And I think a better solution is some teams have now, where they have one analyst who does all that other job for you, because it's not really that difficult to just watch demos if you kind of know what you're looking for, right? But it's harder to like watch practice and know what kind of feedback you have to give the players, because then you have to know them as like the people they are, and it's giving feedback is always really difficult.
Could you see yourself maybe, like, obviously, now you've gone a separate path for the moment, but could you see yourself getting back into things now, with things being as they are, as you say, you have it being quite common for the top 8 teams to have a sports psychologist, to have an overall team manager, to have an analyst, and not only that, some teams will have multiple analysts or people to consult with. And on top of that, for example, I recently had a call with the 16-0 guys. I'm not sure how aware you are of who they are and what they're doing, but they are this analytics platform that has the most incredible analytics that can filter for the most ridiculously detailed aspects. And the whole point is to cut down a huge amount of time for teams or any analysts looking at demos to find trends and tendencies and leaks. And it's kind of crazy. So you have all the tools now. And of course, the era we're describing for you, you didn't really have a lot of these tools. So would that be a game changer for you? Or do you think that it just, it really ran its course and it made sense to just move on completely?
I just need to point out first that at the end of NIP, we have a mental coach. So I didn't have that responsibility at the end. But you have a really good point with the like different tools you can have. We used a tool at the end of NIP. I don't remember. I think it's the tool that I don't remember the name. I know some of the tournaments use it between maps to show like different stats and stuff. But we use that, or I use that to instead of watching demos, because it saved me so much time. But still, it would have been so much nicer to just have like a undedicated analyst, right?
If you could have gone back, is there any sort of point of your time with NIP where you would have done something differently, or do you think that it would all be the same if you went back?
Yeah, I think I would have taken a different approach after they made the coach rule change. And I think I should have told NIP earlier that I needed more help, that it took like too much time to do everything, which meant I didn't do everything, or I couldn't do anything 100%. I could only give felt like I gave 50% to like analysis, feedback, and making new strats, which was really annoying because I really wanted to be able to give 100% on each of those. So I think I should have told NIP earlier that I needed more support.
But but would you have, do you think, come to the same conclusion eventually? And that from what I understand, the travel, the sort of quality of life issues, that became too much?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like right now, when I'm working full time, I have the standard 9 to 5 p.m. life. I'm able to work out. I'm able to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. I just feel so much better. But at the same time, I'm not going to say that I'm never coming back. I mean, if I would get an offer that I cannot refuse, I don't know if I would take it, but I might. I don't know. Because as you said earlier, there's been a lot of changes since I stopped, and almost all the top teams now have multiple coaches. And maybe I could even be an analyst for a team instead of an actual coach.
That's actually a very good point. I think that I do think that there's definitely, I think there will always be room for you. I think it's kind of hard to replicate the amount of experience that you have and sort of the game brain that you have developed over the years. What is your overall interpretation of NIP now and Swedish Counter-Strike?
I think Swedish Counter-Strike in general has a lack of like proper leadership, especially when it comes to like actual in-game leadership. It hasn't been until like the last 6 months when we've seen both Golden and Hampus, if you know that player. He's playing in Red Reserve now, I think, the old Golden lineup. Obviously, since there's no dedicated IGLs in Fnatic or NIP currently, I think you have to look to newer talents. And I think it's a really good thing that we see both Golden and Hampus playing in decent teams now, at least. And I also think one of the other major issues with Swedish Counter-Strike right now is that they tend to look for short-term solutions. Like if something goes wrong, they want to change things immediately, and they want to just make a change and they think that the results will come immediately or after like, a single event, right? So like if it doesn't come after a single event, they will just change something again and there will be no stability.
Do you think this is like an issue of culture or something like that? Because obviously, for those of, for the listeners and for those of us who have been around for, the couple decades that esports has been going now, well, it's a couple decades since Counter-Strike came out. Wow, almost. It was Sweden that was always like the powerhouse of FPS games and especially Counter-Strike. And I feel like right now, it does seem like Sweden is lagging behind a lot. I mean, if you look at some of the models of the teams who are very, very good, we have these international lineups, and we have like what effectively kind of looks like a Fnatic or an NIP when they're at their respective primes, which in phase, but phases into an international lineup where they've combined as many skilled players as they possibly could. And that used to be the thing, that Sweden would be able to have the most skilled players and leverage the skill, and you wouldn't necessarily see a super deep strategic and tactical game in that sense, and it would be more about the individual ability. And is this? Do you think that's an accurate description? And do you think it's just that time has sort of passed now, and you have to look much further beyond that to have success?
Yeah, I completely agree. And the Swedish Counter-Strike culture has always been a bit loose. Usually when teams try to make the change into a more slow tactical style, some are successful in the beginning, but they tend to blame the tactical style if they start losing or when they meet some opposition. Instead of trying to improve their actual, like the actual tactics. If you looked on Astralis is a perfect example of this, right? Where they've had some struggles, but they just kept playing the same style, and now they've maybe not perfected it, but they've reached a point where they're very superior to other teams tactically, and you can clearly show that it's making a lot of difference.
It is actually very interesting as well. This is something we brought up on the podcast just recently with Yanko. I asked him this question. I'll ask it to you as well. One of the reasons I think for the success of Astralis is that they are one of the first teams that actually put their foot down and said, we're not going to go to all of the events. We're actually going to prioritize our approach to the game so that we can have, a better general quality of life for the players. The players can have more rest. And obviously there's some great side effects here because, they take the game very, very professionally as well. And they can genuinely push the envelope and have time to be inspired and actually try new things and perfect it, as you mentioned. So that's just an approach, though. Like that, there is nothing really stopping a lot of other top teams from replicating this. Obviously, there are reasons why it is this way. For example, if the players and the team coach don't have any say, then perhaps the guys who are only looking at the numbers, who own the team, are going to be like, yeah, you have to go to every event because we want to get the best numbers for our sponsors and so on and so forth. But obviously, from a results perspective, that is not the optimal approach. So so the question is, if every team at the top 8 were to have this sort of not perfect but very improved approach, does the gap to Astralis close massively or not? Or is Astralis somehow very special?
I think every team has to kind of adopt that style as well. I mean, the only way you'll be able to go to every tournament and still be able to compete with Astralis or teams like Astralis is that you just have the most ridiculous individual lineup. And clearly some of the teams right now have the individual skill on FaZe, for example, is ridiculous, right? And even MIBR. And maybe it's not only like a Swedish problem, the thing I talked about earlier with having this more loose approach to the game. Because you can see in a lot of interviews, right, even with the top players, they talk about, okay, either you have this tactical style or you play loose. And it's like very binary. There's nothing in between. And like being a coach, and I'm known for being a more tactical, slow in-game leader, I know that I myself I've put some players in bad spots where I've maybe pushed them too far in being like thinking too much about how they play. But at the same time, that's kind of what you have to do during practice. You have to put yourself in a position where you're not comfortable. Even if you would have done the things you're comfortable with, and you have to practice what you're bad at. And it's a different thing during an official games. Obviously, I have to be comfortable all the time. Maybe I lost my point here. I don't know. Or can you still follow what I'm saying?
Keep going.
Where was I?
So I can bring us back a bit. So the end question really is that obviously there is a terrible, like most teams have a horrible approach. Astralis definitely have a very good one from what we can see. Are Astralis, the players, individuals, particularly special? Or if every team had the same approach as them, would we see the gap close in skill?
I think the gap would close. I think it's their approach to practice. That's the key here. And it's very key, especially like practicing things you're bad at. And this sounds like stupidly simple, right? It's so obvious, but I still think a lot of teams that they don't do that. And as soon as they struggle with doing something they're not comfortable with, they will just say, okay, we're just going to play more loose, and that's going to solve everything. Or this player has to do his thing, or we have to allow him to do this. And I think MIBR is a good example of this, right? With Tarek and Stewie joining their lineup. And I've seen some comments or people saying that, okay, they have to let Stewie and Tarek loose. They have to be able to do whatever they want. And it's not really that simple, right? You can't let all 5 players do whatever they want. And if you look at their lineup, they have like Colsera, Fur, Tarek, and Stewie. And like all 4 of those players, you want to give them the freedom because they're so individual skilled, but you really can't, right? Because you can't have 4 players doing whatever they want. It just doesn't make any sense. So some of them have to, I don't want to say make a sacrifice, because the end goal should always be like trying to win the game, not having a good individual performance. But in like a good individual performance sense, they kind of have to make a sacrifice.
So why is it, do you think then, that it is sort of so binary in the minds of players, sort of tactical versus loose? Is it something to do with just the fact that loose is... you kind of have some comfort in the ambiguity of it, and it's like a tactical style, like it's much more complex to nail it down, so it's a bit scary when you try it and it doesn't work. So it's easier just to be like, oh well, we'll just play a simpler game where we can rely more sort of emotionally on, or instinctively on, or intuitively on just our general Counter-Strike skill, as opposed to really trying something as a team, as Astralis does. Is it just too scary, or like why do you think that is the general vibe?
I think a lot of teams struggle with losing practice games, and they will lose a lot of confidence in doing that instead of being like very pragmatic about it. And I think you made a really good point there, that they just want to get the good results immediately, and if they don't, they want something to blame that's easy to change, and obviously that could be the tactical approach. And then you change it to a more loser style, and let's say you win 1 or 2 maps in a row, and it's like, oh yeah, let's do this. This is the loser style we're supposed to play. And I think that mindset is what a lot of player has these days.
That is a very fascinating way to look at it, because it is almost as though, again, like the tactical style, because you are trying to achieve something, and you're going to have specific roles, specific lineups, specific timings for certain players, and if they feel as though the general game plan in that sense is not really working, or things are not coming together, it's much harder for them to see the kind of the macro picture of why their role is there in that way, as opposed to and opposed to that, they just look at it from the micro perspective, where it's like, I feel like I'm boxed in. The only impact I can have on the map is this, and nothing's going well, and I feel like I'm just along for this really shitty ride where we're losing. It's and I suppose that does come back to having not only the proper approach, but also the proper system to go with it. You have time to rest, you have professional and structured approach to your practice, as well as having the team of people behind you trying to really give you faith in the system, as opposed to, I think really what your case was, where, you were the everyman. And it must be so difficult in the position you're in to get everybody on the same page. You must have had a lot of frustrations getting people to believe in the system when you were coaching an IP, right? Or is that?
Yeah, definitely. And that's on me, actually. I mean, it's the coach's responsibility to make the players change. And it can be really difficult. And especially when, like, during practice, you have a lot of struggles and just keep losing. And I think a good example of this would be Mirage. Let's say you have a bad T default on Mirage, right? Then you can't play that map. You basically have to veto it if you're playing in a tournament. So if you're let's say you have a tournament in 2 weeks, and you know that your T default on Mirage sucks. So it's like, okay, we have to fix it. So during the practice, it doesn't make sense to even a single round make a call where you do your, I don't know, B or A set execute or A split, which you have a like 60% win rate of, because you know it works, or everyone knows the roles. It doesn't make any sense. What you have to do is just keep grinding the default, and you make some changes, and these changes probably not going to work, right? And you have to try it. Okay, that didn't work. You can even use the ecos or pause during the practice and say, okay, can we make some adjustments like right now, and try that, because you kind of have to find a way to make it work. And to do that, you have to just keep losing to find the way that works for you, or maybe it works in the current meta, because T default on Mirage is a perfect example of something that can change in weeks how you're supposed to do it with the nades in middle.
So is this to an extent as well, because obviously this is about getting everybody on the same page and having everyone also be sort of paying attention in all these situations and doing the work, because again, from each of the players' perspectives, they're operating from this micro picture in a sense, especially if you're looking at the guy that's not the in-game leader. They're thinking, okay, what is my role? What is my position? They do their job, and the outcome might suck a lot of the time. And they just kind of have to be the pawns in that sense and run it over and over again. Whereas for you know, you're managing the macro perspective. You know, how is the team working together as a unit? Is this something that actually works? Do I have to change this one guy's role? And so from that perspective, I imagine it must really come into the picture of how coachable certain players are, because again, everyone has to have the same vision, so they can have the trust that what they're doing is actually makes sense. And obviously you have to have the right review processes, bring everyone together afterwards, so everyone knows, you know, why they're doing certain things. But did you notice a big difference between, I don't know if this is a word, coachability, you know, between the old and the young? Because in NIP, when you were there, you know, you had the core, of course, you know, Get Right, Forest, and Exist, really old school players, and then, you know, the likes of like Draken and Rez. That was the most consistent lineup during your tenure, I think. Was there a big difference in how coachable the young were versus the old? Were there any particular issues with particular players on getting on board with you, or did you find a lot of resistance, or was it somewhat seamless?
If I put it like this, there was some difference in coachability, but it didn't necessarily have to do with age. There was no pattern in like being younger or older made you more coachable. At least I only have been coaching one team, but in my case at least. And I also want to point out that not being coachable is not the same as disagreeing, because having discussions and disagreeing about certain things, that's part of the progress, right? The important thing is to be able to agree as a team. And even though you disagree with the majority of the team, you have to be able to practice what the majority wants to practice, even though you disagree with it.
Is that a difficult line to walk, though, as the coach? Because I think, you know, in some systems, for example, the coach is where the buck stops. You know, there can be a discussion until a certain point where the coach is like, I am the coach and this is how I want to run the team. And I guess this goes to, as you mentioned previously, the ambiguity that's inherent in your responsibilities and where the lines are in coaching in Counter-Strike. No one really has a formula. It's different for every single team. So like, how did you manage disagreements? Did you have a lot of spots where you had to make big compromises, or did you and bite your tongue, and basically not get the result that you wanted? Because there has to be spots where you were the minority on a decision and you genuinely felt as the coach that this was the best route for the team, and people disagreed. Like, how do you handle those situations?
I don't know if we really had like some major disagreement. There were some small things what we're supposed to do in practice. The example I brought up earlier, like practicing a single default, maybe not like all 15 rounds, but almost. Some players disagree with that, and it was quite difficult. I mean, before the game, you could have a talk, and you see that, okay, the majority agrees we're supposed to do this, so we go into the practice and we do this, and maybe you start losing, right? So when you start losing, there's good spot for the people that disagree to come in, and it's like, oh, we should have done what I said. And that could cause a lot of tension. So it is really tough, because that's also the coach's responsibility to find a good balance and be able to convince the players that disagree that they're supposed to buy into the system. You have to be able to sell your system, which can be difficult when some players want like immediate results.
From that perspective too, there's obviously, again, when you're the player, there's such an emotional connection to the outcome, especially in Counter-Strike. Really in anything in life, we generally by default have an emotional connection to the outcome, and that outcome's either success or failure in whatever instance it is, and obviously failure sucks. Did you ever have this situation where you had to coach out of some players this outcome-oriented mindset so that they could have more faith going with what you're saying? And the reason I ask that is because I feel like you can have these horrible traps sometimes with players where, because they're being outcome oriented and they need to win the practice games and they need to have good emotions when they're playing so that they can have fun, they aren't going to be objective in the best course of action to get the team the results at the tournaments. So did you have to work on mindsets? Did you have lots of discussions around that?
We did have some discussions, and I think the mental coach Jens we brought in almost a year ago now, he made some really good changes, and he was able to really make the players understand how they had to change their mindset during practice.
Is there anything that you can share?
Let's see if I can remember something in particular. Well, not really something specific. Usually discussions, they were more at a macro level, especially when they were with the mental coach. And usually he talked with them individually, so I couldn't actually see what he was saying to them.
Aha, I see. Well, that would certainly make it hard to remember then. What is, because I have to ask you about Swedish CS having you on. What is your impression of NIP right now and their potential right now and how things are going?
I think individually they have a extremely strong lineup right now, probably better than the one we had when I left. It's just, once again, I don't know how good of an in-game leader Lekro will be. And I think that will be the deciding factor whether they will be able to be successful or not. And I have no clue if he's a good in-game leader. He probably doesn't know himself. Is it one tournament he's been the in-game leader, if I'm correct? Let's see here.
Not 100%, but it's definitely not very many.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a gamble, definitely. I mean, they have the individual skill, but they're lacking a proper in-game leader, and they're lacking a dedicated opper, which could be a struggle. That was actually the best thing when we brought Draken on. I don't like using the word roles, but at least we had, this guy will do the opping role, because the opping role is the only role in CS which is kind of clear cut.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, obviously, he went to Fnatic. I think Draken is a player that definitely people were very hot and cold about. I think with NIP, it did seem like there was some stagnation, but now he's moved on to Fnatic. It seems so far, at the very least, at least the E-League, he performed very well with them. Do you think it's just a better fit team-wise for Draken, or what's your interpretation of him as a player at the moment?
Well, it's quite obvious that he's a player that likes to play a bit more loose, and I think Fnatic plays more loose than NIP, so I think it's a great fit. I think he's been getting too much slack as well. I mean, he's a really good, especially CT opper, where you can be real aggressive. For example, playing CT overpass, I think he's very good at improvising. He will change up his positions. He's really good at communicating. Okay, I'm going to push short this round. I'm going to go aggressive A long, for example. The problem is when you have these aggressive young players playing the op, they tend to really struggle as T, because as T, usually your role is more to condition the opposing opper. So an overpass could be an example there, where you just want to stand in T slope, and you know which angle you're supposed to camp to be able to pick him off if he's going to peek from balloons. If you're an aggressive opper, you maybe rather go for a pick, which is not impossible, but it's very difficult to do as T.
Right. So it's basically just about creating threats.
Yeah, exactly.
And presence, and this is actually something that I think is fascinating, because, and this is another thing that you can actually do with that analytical tool I mentioned previously, is you can sort of measure the rotations based on threat, in a sense, or based on different smokes and so on and so forth. Sometimes things can look a little bit useless because nothing's happening, but obviously. And that's exactly that goes with your point about the younger players thinking that it's a bit more about frags than it is again about that macro picture of how how you are helping your team create space on the map to abuse. So that's a really interesting idea.
Just imagine if you're the CT opper and you're going aggressive. Let's find a good map. Let's use overpass again, right? Let's say you're going aggressive A long, and you want to take a pick towards what do you call that in English? With the slide.
Playground.
Playground. Thank you. You're gonna go aggressive to pick playground, and the opper's waiting there, and he just kills you immediately, and he's just sitting in an angle, and it's a 5v4. Like 15 seconds into the round, you're not going to go aggressive there anymore. It's going to condition you into playing more defensive, and maybe you will go aggressive underground next round, and we're still waiting for you. It's more that style you want as a team opper, rather than being the aggressor.
The interesting thing there is then understanding tendencies from teams, because when you're playing random pugs, it is a complete gamble. But when you're playing against professional teams, there's a lot of data out there and patterns which you can exploit. And so you can actually make those statistics for yourself, or the likelihood that you're actually going to put your AWPer in the correct positions a bit more likely, perhaps, which is, I think, fascinating with the mind games.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing I didn't actually get your opinion on, but I mentioned it earlier. What is your interpretation of Golden leaving, his impact on Fnatic, and him as in-game leader so far?
I was just as surprised as everyone else. I guess it's true what the rumors that when Exist left NIP, that I think this was around Katowice, right? When the rumors were that Golden was already kicked from Fnatic, and Exist was supposed to take his place. But then they won Katowice, and they had just won WESG. So they was like, oh, we're winning everything. We're going to keep the same lineup. And maybe that made it kind of awkward for Golden, knowing that he was supposed to leave the team. I don't know, because obviously they had a lot of success in the beginning of the year, more success than they've had since they had the actual Fnatic era in 2015. Yeah, I'm just very surprised that they kicked him. I think the teams really need to gamble on someone new being in-game leader.
I guess this is just another massive test for Golden and a good opportunity for him to surprise us. Or how do you see Cloud9?
I haven't really thought about Cloud9 that much, because it feels like they just kind of scrambled to get a 5-man lineup at this point. It's not really clear what kind of role Stico has on the team. It's officially he's a stand-in, right?
Yeah.
So he's just a stand-in. So yeah, it's really hard to tell. I mean, I guess it's more about the mindset of the players, because if the players know that they're probably not going to play with this lineup, that's not going to be a good thing, because it kills the motivation to practice so much. It kind of helps during the tournaments because you're going to play with less pressure. But in this era, with both Navi and Astralis, and Liquid for that matter, playing so strategically, it's going to be very difficult to do something when you have a lineup which you kind of know is not going to last.
Yeah, it's pretty awkward. I mean, my personal read of it is just that after the major, we'll have to wait until then, because I imagine the situation with rosters will be a bit easier for them to maybe pick up someone that's more ideal, unless Stico works out really well in the short term. But it's always difficult and awkward when someone's standing in and having to invest time. But I guess for Stico, it's the case that he gets to really prove himself as a player and prove his versatility and try to raise his stock, because despite being for me, Stico is kind of like a Taco situation with SK, where everyone's the general public consensus seemed to be, not that the public consensus is necessarily ever correct, but the public consensus of course was that Taco, he's obviously, if he leaves, then maybe you get Nico in there, whoever, name X really individually good player, the team would be so good because Taco individually is not amazing, blah blah blah. And it seems like that was like Stico was branded with the same brush in many respects. Do you think that it is very analogous to the Taco situation, or how do you look at the Stico being pushed out and Snacks going into Mousesports?
I think both trades were bad for both Mousesports and SK, but I think the SK one was worse. I think Taco had a more crucial role in SK than what Stico had in Mousesports, even though I think Mousesports with Stico was better than with Snacks. And it comes back to the problem or the issue that we spoke about like 20 minutes ago with like teams wanting to play loose and just having more individual skill, which can make it more difficult. And I think if you watch a lot of the old SK demos, I think Taco, even though he didn't have like the best statistics, he still made a huge impact in the game. He was one of the better players at doing playing the conditional CS style, as I talked about earlier, playing with the AWP. For example, a good example would be T overpass, where you're the guy that's going to throw the mollo onto B short. You're going to spam the wooden panel. Then you're going to listen and see if someone goes aggressive sewers. And you just want to make the same pattern every single round and not make you're just gonna condition the CTs to force them to make hard decisions. That's your role, and kind of open up rounds in the future. Because let's say you do that, you throw the Molotov to be short, you spam the wooden barrels, the first 5 defaults, but you're actually doing an A default. So then at round 9, you're gonna do an aggressive B short play. And this was actually this is something that they actually did. I know it was Fur and another player. Taco would do this exact same pattern. He would throw them all and spam, and you would just have Fur and another player just go aggressive, be short, and go for picks. And because the B players were so used to this pattern from Taco, they would not suspect this fast aggression. I mean, this is something that a lot of teams do. This is not unique to SK. This is a very default play, but it still shows that you kind of need a player that take these, I don't want to say bitch roles, because you're doing the same thing over and over again, but kind of understands it's important, and he would just keep doing it. Because if you look at the MIB lineup now, who do you want to be? Who do you want to put in that position to be the guy that's going to do that same thing over and over again? You're not going to get many duels. You might actually get picked sometimes because maybe the CTs are doing some monster aggression. They know exactly your pattern, so they would maybe throw a pop flash and push out monster and kill you. But if you just keep doing this, you might make some other be able to do a play later in the game. And you don't want to put Stewie or Tarek in that positions, do you?
Do you think Yanko joining can make a difference? Do you think that coaching is not the issue? Or where do you see the solutions? If you're in the shoes of, or even if you're in the shoes of Yanko, how do you solve MIBR? They have an incredible lineup.
It's a difficult question. I think you kind of have to make one of these players take a more a step back and play the more supportive role. For example, the position I talked about earlier. And it is really hard, because who do you want to pick? I don't want to pick Fur, because you know what Fur can do when you watch during the SK era. So who do you pick then? It's not going to be Fallen, because he's going to play the AWP. It's not going to be Cold Sarah, obviously. So then you're left with Tarek and Stewie. So it's going to be one of those. And you don't want to have
Tarek, right?
Yeah, exactly. Then I would probably pick Tarek to play that role, because you don't want. I mean, for me, Stewie, when he's playing the lurker role, I've always got the feeling that he's more of a old school get right, more happy kind of style, and that's not what you want to do on certain maps. On some maps that can work, but Overpass is. It feels like I've only been talking about Overpass. But that's an example where you don't want to be that kind of lurker especially when you're playing B.
So can you then expand on that and describe the different types of lurkers with any examples?
Okay, so an example would be if you were going to play the happy style on B, then you would the first round you would sit outside the
B
monster
overpass?
town.
Okay,
yeah. Let's keep doing B overpass, because that's the only thing I know apparently. So maybe you're going to play outside of monster town. You're going to listen. Okay, it seems like you're playing 2B. Maybe later in the game you want to try to sneak out sewers, go into that corner under the wooden panel, if you know where I'm talking about, and kind of go hide there, and while your teammates are making plays on A, and you can hear the rotations, they're rotating one guy back, maybe I can make a play, push out towards short and get a backstab. Maybe I can go up to door after my teammate is taking long, I can get a backstab through door when the C just thought it was clear. There's a lot of different ways you can play that where you can get kills. The only problem is that it's, at least I think that it's a way worse approach than just doing the more, when you just try to condition them with the Molotov, everything, spam the wooden panel, stylish. And I'm not recommending people to do this like literally 50 rounds, but just like understanding how you're supposed to condition them on a map like that. I think Zipex is a perfect example. Also a perfect example of someone that's really good at playing that particular position, because he would do what I just said, throw the Molotov, spam the wooden panel, and sometimes he would just sit outside of Monster and just be completely quiet, like 3 or 4 rounds into the game, like doing nothing. Because let's imagine you're the analyst, right? And you're watching, okay, how does the B player play? So we can do maybe we can do some monster aggression, right? So, okay, if they throw the Molotov, okay, he's going to be there and he's going to camp, he's going to be in the same position. Okay, if there's no Molotov, he might still be outside of Monster, because sometimes he just does that. So with the Molotov or no Molotov, that doesn't give you any information whatsoever, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It just makes it very obscure.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, oh, he knows I'm watching when you're watching the demo. It's really frustrating. Yeah.
And quickly, what are your impressions then of Snacks on Mouse Sports? Is it just super weird, or?
Yeah, I think it's super weird. They only played 1 tournament with Snacks.
It didn't go very well. It didn't go very well.
No, I just think it's really weird. I think it's too soon but it kind of doesn't make any sense, right?
I wanted to be optimistic, but when I watched it, I mean, I wanted to be optimistic just because you try to think about the positives, and you're like, okay, well, Snacks, he can AWP. Stiko can, you wouldn't really say Stiko was a great AWPer. Snacks, in the spots where, because there's lots of spots where Snacks, played B, like, Stiko was a B player generally, and you think, okay, well, Snacks he's going to be like better in those like 1v1s where you get maybe it's a lurker, or maybe it's a Stewie on Mirage or something, and he's trying to like bully your B player. Snacks is gonna be really good at those mind games, and that's what he's really good at, playing on those smokes. He might get that 1 extra kill, like looking at the bright sides. But in practice so far, it just doesn't seem like there's cohesion at all. Obviously, it's only been a single tournament, but the question is, from an identity standpoint, whether it works, I guess. And so far, I'm not sure that the true Snacks identity really has a place on the team. But when they got Snacks on the team, I think it was Chris J who said that they wanted something extra in those clutch situations. And obviously, Snacks is a good clutcher, and that does make a lot of sense. I mean, like that B player. Let's say, staying with the Mirage example, he's often going to come into loads of spots where on the rotation, he's going to have a 1vx because, the A players died quickly or whatever it is, and B is generally hit less than A. So I can see some of the logic there, but it just doesn't seem to work out in practice so far. And it's again this situation where, again, I think I mentioned this on the previous podcast, like some players can adapt really well, but most can't. And do you agree with that?
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, I've seen some players change, but it's usually over a very long period of time. Like, I've seen some old school Mad Fraggers transition into like IGLs and taking a more like defensive, more support role. Like, I think Exist is a good example. For those who doesn't know, he was like the main carry for his teams back in 1.6 in Fnatic, for example. And obviously that's completely changed now. So I think it's possible, but it's not that you can bring in Snacks into the team and change his role and then expect it to work in like 2 months.
Is it a situation where if they want it to work, they just have to rebuild everything? Is that like the severity of the situation? Is that what you would do? Like, how would you deal with this situation? Because
I don't know. I'm like looking at the lineup right now. I mean, they have a lot of individual skill, and they still have 4 players from that like really strong lineup they had, or when they had those really good performances. So, I mean, obviously, I think they can do some damage, but I don't know.
Is there a team out there that you watch them play and you're like, if I could just jump in and coach them for like 1 tournament, I could make them so much better? Or is there a team with like a glaring? I mean, that might be a very arrogant thing to think. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. But I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, but I don't know if I want to answer that.
But
I was the coach for North.
I was thinking about North as well. I was actually thinking, because obviously a criticism of North is that that they play with too much focus strategically, and they don't have enough. Like their play is not dynamic enough or loose enough in certain spots. It's overly strategical, overly tactical, but obviously there's other teams as well which have a lot of skill, and there could be small tweaks that you could make. Is there any situation like that? Any team, top team that you think with some small tweaks could be performing a lot better?
I'm looking at the world ranking right now.
I think North has been a common contender in that category.
Yeah, I think they could be a lot better. I think they could be way better than they are right now. And I think you're making a good point there. It sounds like maybe it sounds like I'm saying that you're only supposed to play like slow strategic style all the time, but you can also overdo it. That's a really good point. I don't know if that's the case with the current North lineup. I remember just a few months ago, I think AC had an interview. They're playing a lot more loose now, so maybe they've changed something. They did have that one event. Was it DreamHack Valencia when they played with Mixwell and they won, I think?
As far as the game itself is concerned, though, what's your opinion of where Counter-Strike is at the moment? Do you feel like there's an issue that you would change, like map pools? Do you think that the map pools should be changed more often, or there's more new maps, or do you think that is
change maps more often? That would be the best change they can make, I think.
Wouldn't that be an issue though for, let's say, consistency on the top level?
It might, but like variants could also add to the I don't know, what's it, like flavor of the game, or add to the viewership as well, because it would create more drama. I mean, you don't want to make it random to change the map pool every week. Just add a few new maps and tell the teams early. Like if you tell the teams early, it will make it less random, because then they will have time to prepare and they will have time to make all the mistakes during practice games rather than during the tournaments. But at the same time, you still give the more tactical teams the opportunity to be more creative and come up with new strats that they can save for the tournaments.
Right. I mean, so obviously, like one of the issues there is that like where is the balance? Because if you have too many maps coming in, then there's too much variance, because it just becomes a battle of who can find the best pop flashes and who can find the best one-way smokes, and then you have too many games won on gimmicks as opposed to like genuinely like very good Counter-Strike. But if you have like not enough, then it's obviously a bit stale and boring. So like, where is the balance?
I think maybe changing 1 to 2 maps per season. And
Like,
now they're changing.
By season, do you mean like every 4 months or something?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe 1 map every 4 months. That could make sense. And they could also make updates to the maps. I think they made some good updates to Nuke, for example. And I really like that they removed the skybox on some of the maps. I just saw a clip today from Astralis when they threw a Mirage top mid from CT spawn, which is really powerful, and maybe that could make some changes in the meta. I don't doesn't necessarily need to do that, but at least it's something new and interesting, and I haven't seen that on Mirage for seriously the last 2 years.
I suppose it is really interesting, because if we're speculating and we are in this like the ecosystem has changed in a way where teams have more time to practice between tournaments. So this, I think this is like a big win for everybody, right? Because there's the situation I was describing, which we have right now is a situation where there's immense viewer fatigue, and it's difficult for people to innovate, and there's not really all that much to innovate upon because we have the same maps just all the time. So if you have this new world where there's less big tournaments, there's maybe no online leagues at all, maybe. So, as you said, we're not going to be seeing teams unless they're at the big tournaments all of a sudden. Then it's going to be really interesting, because these teams will also have time to practice. So every big tournament will be like very interesting to watch, because you're always going to see something new. Now, and that's going to be amazing for like a storyline perspective. And I think so I think it'd just be way more engaging, actually. That could be really awesome, to be honest.
I mean, when was the last time you remember a team doing something like so different that it's like, oh my god, this will change how teams play this map? It was I can't remember the last time it happened.
I have no idea. Like, what was the last new map? Was it in?
That's true. New map. Okay.
Is it Overpass? I feel like it can't be. I must be missing something.
I mean, Cobblestone and Overpass came at the same time, right? It was ESL Cologne 2014, but Cobble was in such a bad shape. Do you remember Drop Zone, where there were like 3 ways you could get into drop? Like weird staircase. Like you jump down and you could go like straight as well. It was so strange.
Wow. The Cobblestone, I feel like it doesn't even count because it wasn't like a new map. It was already like, there was, it's based on a previous map. I mean, obviously it's very different, but still. So does that mean it's just Overpass, really? That
I guess.
Made it into competitive. Well, obviously, I guess, like, Jesus. All right. Well, I guess, I mean, because it's a really interesting discussion to have, and I think that it's a really important one to have. I think it would be so much more interesting with actual maps, like actual new maps to come in. But
the counter argument would be that for some of the viewers that they understand the old maps, and it would be hard for them to know what's going on the newer maps. I guess that's the only like real valid counter argument to changing the map pool more often.
I hope we get there.
Indeed.
As a sort of finishing question or two, going back to like the general coaching thing, who are the coaches in Counter-Strike that you either respect the most or think are the most impressive for whatever reason?
I would say Sonic from Astralis, and when I left NIP, I actually made a list of potential candidates to replace me, and I had actually put Ave, the current coach of North, on top. I don't know, maybe he's been struggling with the transition into CSGO because obviously he doesn't have that much experience with it. But in 1.6, he was, he was according to me, the best in-game leader ever in 1.6. So that's why I think if he would put in the time, he could make a really good coach in CSGO. Well.
So what made him the best in-game leader in 1.6?
I think he had a very, I don't know if you know about the MTW NOA Danish team back in the days where you had players like Sonic, Ave, HPX, or Wimp. Yeah, Wimp is actually he's working for North as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think so.
And it was very similar to Astralis. They played a very slow and structured default style. They didn't have a lot of crazy executes, but they just played in a very, very annoying way, and they always studied their opponents. And I remember they were by far the team that I struggled the most with calling against. Like other teams, even though we didn't beat them all the time, I still felt kind of comfortable. Like I knew what they were going to do, what we were supposed to do against them, but it was always a struggle against MTW.
And you mentioned Sonic, and actually I asked a similar question to Yanko on the podcast recently, and he said Sonic as well. Obviously, there might be viewers thinking like, well, duh, Astralis is the best team, but obviously I don't think that's necessarily your criteria for selecting Sonic. So why Sonic?
I think he's a good overall. Like he knows a lot about the tactical aspects of the game, but he also seems like a father figure to the players, and they all respect him a lot. And I think I can only compare to myself and my struggles. I think even though I think I have some good knowledge about how you're supposed to play the game, I still kind of struggle with reaching the players and motivating them into following my system. And it seems like they have a better balance of that in Astralis, and I guess Sonic is one of the factors to why it works.
Will we ever see you playing again?
You never know, but it's very unlikely. I mean, my individual skill in CSGO has never been that high. I mean,
And
I
last time
did.
you played, you made the playoffs of a major. So.
The last time NIP came to the playoffs of a major, all thanks to me. No, but I mean, I was quite clear in both Team Acer, my short player career in CSGO, and when I played MLG Columbus. I mean, I'm not the worst player in the world, but obviously I'm not on par with the top players right now. That's just silly. And I mean, if I would play again, I would have to put in like thousands of hours, and still knowing that it's unlikely that I would be good individual enough to play in a top 20 team. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, some diminishing returns there. So in that sense, I think to just like make it explicit, you're like being an analyst or a coach is something that you would consider moving forwards. And obviously it seems like doing talent work here or there seems like something you're also interested in. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm quite flexible with my current job, so doing talent work is something that I definitely would do. Maybe not like, how many days did you say they traveled in 2000?
Yeah, I think you can pick and choose a bit more.
yeah, just doing some events here and there. Watching games.
So I think it's good to just like get that out there, because I think sometimes people just make assumptions, you know, and you have sort of disappeared. So that's good to know that you're still interested in it being involved. But that's about it for now. I think we've been going just over an hour. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure that, to be honest, like we just sort of improvised this one, and I feel like there is a huge amount of different sorts of topics we could talk about in the future. So if you're interested in coming on again in the future, I'm definitely gonna hit you up.
Yeah, definitely. It was great.
Cheers.
Cheers.